Hello, my loves. Today we're going to look at some more Reddit stories, and if you've enjoyed a Reddit story, why don't you consider hitting the subscribe button? Maybe that's the notification bell too, and let's start with today's story. Revenge on a client who tried to throw me under the bus. I was pushing 40, and I'd learned a lot of lessons in more than 10 years of legal practice. But one of the most important lessons I learned was from an older lawyer that I worked for as a summer student, after the second year of law school. A lawyer has 3 duties, he told me: first to himself, second to the court, and last, the client. Always make sure you come first, and the client comes last. The reason? Because clients will fuck you, he said. They'll throw you under the bus without thinking twice. I should have stayed with this lawyer, but being young and an idiot, I had to go work downtown, and I'm still downtown now, but fortunately for me, I remembered this lesson, and it came in handy many years later when a client really did try to throw me under the bus. My client was this mid-sized company that did this and that and owned things here and there, not big enough to be listed, but it did have a pretty sizable real estate portfolio, and one day a building they owned burned to the ground. The company wanted to collect on the insurance, so they told Frank, a veteran salaryman, to deal with it. Frank was close to 60 and thought he knew what he was doing. He didn't need me to help him with the insurance claim, he told me. He had everything under control. Besides, lawyers are expensive. Some guys really get off on not paying legal fees, and Frank was one of those guys who gloated over every penny that he managed not to pay to the lawyers. I dealt with Frank a lot, and he was always nickel and diming me. The insurer is going to fuck you, I told Frank. It was only by luck that I even knew about the fire and the loss, because Frank had not asked for my help. He'd just let it slip one day, and since then, I'd kept on top of him, trying to get him to smarten up. I'd had to fight to get him to send me the proof of loss form to make sure he hadn't messed that up. Frank fucked up a lot, and I wondered sometimes how he had a job. But the proof of loss was okay, at least, so that was one less thing to worry about. You don't know that, he said. I could tell he just wanted to get me off the phone. I'm paid to know when insurers are trying to screw my clients, I said, and the insurer is going to screw you. They've been stringing you along for ages with requests and questions and paperwork, but they aren't going to pay you. Not unless you sue them. But Frank said he knew what he was doing, that it was all under control, and besides, he got along with the adjuster so great. The limitation period expires in 2 weeks, I said, and once that 2 weeks pass, it will be too late to sue. The moment that limitation period expires, they will stop taking your calls. You'll get a final email saying sorry, you're out of time, and that will be that. Don't leave this till the last minute. Let me sue right now, and you'll have the money in no time. Frank was like, sure, fine, whatever, don't bother me, I got this, blah blah blah, and he got off the phone as soon as he could. I sent him the usual email with clear warnings and recommendations, which he ignored. I sent the email again, and then again as the limitation period approached, and again a couple of days before the deadline. I'm going to be at trial, and you won't be able to reach me, my final email said, but you have to sue. You have other firms on your list, so pick one and sue. He didn't bother to reply, and I went off to do my trial. The trial lasted a couple of weeks, and no email from Frank. Then a month passed, and another month, still no email. I figured he must have sorted things out. Maybe Frank was right after all, I said to myself, and then my phone rang. It was Frank. Remember that fire insurance thing we spoke about? We'd only spoken about it like a dozen times. I figured he was calling up to gloat, so I cut to the chase. So they paid out. That's great, Frank. You were right. He asked me what I was talking about, and could he see a copy of the claim? What claim? I said. The claim against the insurer. You know, that claim. Does that mean the insurer didn't pay? I said. He hung up on me, and then a few minutes later, my computer dinged, and there was Frank's email, talking about how we spoke, and he told me to sue, and he was worried when I hadn't sent him a copy of the claim, so he was following up to get a copy of the claim. I emailed him back. I take it that the insurer didn't pay you, just like I told you they wouldn't, and now that the limitation period is expired, they told you to jump in the lake, leaving you with a loss in the millions. Is that it? I'd made a mistake by not going over Frank's head when he wouldn't listen to me, but if I'd gone over Frank's head, I never would have received another file from him, so I didn't. But that was then, and this was now, so I carbon copy Frank's boss and his boss's boss, plus I carbon copy Bill, the client's in-house counsel. Bill acknowledged my email right away later that day. Frank messed up, he said, we know that. He's an idiot. So what do we do? So his excuses didn't work? Nope. Bill explained that they'd summoned Frank to a boardroom, but his story didn't add up, given all the warnings I'd sent him. Besides, there would have been no reason for him to keep emailing the insurer if he'd told me to sue. Once the file goes to legal counsel, Frank's role was over. The company knew Frank was bullshitting them. So that's it, then? Bill said, we just lost a couple of $1,000,000? It's okay, I said, explaining that when I realized that Frank was going to fuck up, I issued a claim against the insurer. Because I'd made Frank send me the proof of loss a while earlier, I had enough information that I could sue to preserve the cause of action. Not a great claim and short on details, but good enough. You sued without instructions? Bill said. Lawyers aren't supposed to sue without instructions because if you do that, you're personally liable for whatever costs the other side incurs. It's a big deal to sue without instructions. Yup, I said, I sued without instructions. I pulled up a copy of the claim and emailed it to him as we spoke. It's a little rough, I said, but we can always amend. Thank God. Bill said, can I leave it with you? Of course he could. The insurer was a sitting duck, and I knew I'd collect from them, no problem. A few days later, I got a call from another guy who worked for the client, a guy I didn't normally deal with. They had a situation and needed my help. I usually deal with Frank, I said, what's up? What was up was that Frank got called into another meeting, and they handed him a one-page letter, and then he put his little office things in a box, and security walked him past his coworkers to the elevator and escorted him downstairs to the parking lot. Bye-bye, Frank. He was too old to get another job, or at least, not a decent one. It was a life-changing event for Frank, but for me, he was just an anecdote, a cautionary tale that I tell young lawyers sometimes over beers, maybe too often, because I'm getting on in years and I have my favorite stories. I wasn't trying to get revenge on Frank, not at all, and I would have felt a bit sorry for him if he hadn't been trying to throw me under the bus. But the guy who replaced him was great and never nickel and dimed me, so it was all good. Story: a lawyer's pro-revenge on a wife beater. Let's call him Joe. I have to call him something, the man I ruined, but I can't call him by his real name, so let's call him Joe. Joe was a wife beater. I was hired by Joe's brother-in-law, the brother of the wife that Joe beat. My client was also Joe's ex-business partner. Aside from the whole "you beat up my sister" thing, my client had another beef with Joe, a serious business beef. My client took it to court and gave me the case to handle. Joe and his lawyers fought me long and hard. Joe was confident that his bullshit and outright perjury would carry the day. It had always worked before. His bullshit and his fists had won him a good settlement with his ex-wife, free of child support, so maybe he thought that threats and lies would carry the day once more, but he was wrong, and after the trial I had a judgment against him, a big judgment, far bigger than he could pay. Joe twisted and he turned and he shimmied and shaked, but after a while I'd located and taken all his assets. It was easy, really. Joe had no thought of consequences, and so he didn't lawyer up until it was too late. If one of my clients ever sues you, you're in trouble, because my clients lawyer up before they even know your name. But Joe didn't lawyer up until the process server threw the papers at his feet, and by then, it was far too late. I went through Joe's assets like a meat grinder, and after a while Joe had but one property left, a house, and he clung to that house, for it was rented out, and his sole source of income. Joe lived in the unfinished basement, and he survived on what the upstairs tenants paid him. He cashed their rent checks at payday loan places, paying hefty fees, but it was worth it, because he knew that I'd garnish any bank account that he opened. Joe managed to hide his rental place from me for a while because he owned it through a numbered company, but my investigator found him one day and followed him home. Joe self-repped his way through the next stage, which took a couple of years, while I punctured his corporate veils and his sad efforts at a fraudulent conveyance, but in the end, I had his last house, the house where he lived in the unfinished basement. Joe stepped out one day to get a pack of cigarettes, and when he came back the sheriff had changed the locks. "Can my client at least live in the basement?" Joe's lawyer said to me, pro bono, because by this point Joe had nothing to pay lawyers. I knew the pro bono guy, he practiced law nearby. As I was talking to him, I could see pro bono guy's office window across the parking lot from my office tower window. "Ask the purchaser," I said, "it's out of my hands," and it was. I told Joe's lawyer that the new owner and nominee, one of my client's employees, wouldn't let him back into his shitty basement apartment. Joe, a man who had owned this and that here and there and all over town, had just lost the last thing he owned on earth. Except for his truck. He still had his truck left. Joe's truck was this big-ass gas-guzzling beast that he drove around in. It was too old and too frail to be worth seizing, so I let Joe keep it, and I was glad I did that, because now the truck was where Joe slept. Until he made a mistake and lost his truck, too. He lost his truck the day I got a phone call from the tenants at the house that Joe used to own. He came back and parked his truck across the driveway, the tenant said, adding that Joe had gone nuts. He'd parked his truck there in a rage, out of spite, and then walked into town, saying he'd be back later that day to sleep in his truck. "Can you get around the truck?" I asked. The tenant could not. The driveway was blocked. I called one of the tow truck guys that I used to defend back in my criminal lawyer days, and in a couple of hours that truck was gone, and parked somewhere else, somewhere special, in accordance with my specific instructions. "My guy wants his truck back," the pro bono lawyer said the next day when he called me. "Not happening," I said. I stood in my office 15 floors above the parking lot, and looked down where I imagined my pro bono counterpart was standing in his office, facing the same lot. "But you have no right to the truck," he said. "He has no right to block a man's driveway," I replied. It was terrible, really, standing up high, pronouncing words that took away a man's final asset, the last thing he owned on earth. I imagined that this must be what God feels like, before he strips a man of everything and sends him to hell. "Are you really gonna make me go to court over this?" said pro bono guy. "Do what you gotta do," I said, and pro bono guy said his client was coming in the next day to sign an affidavit, and then they were going to court to get the truck back. But I was unconcerned. The next day was bright and the sun was shining, and it was 9 a.m. as I looked out the window and sipped my coffee. My phone rang. I picked up. It was pro bono man. "Why didn't you tell me that Joe's truck was parked right outside my office?" His voice was tight, and I could tell that he must have been shaking with anger. "Is that so?" I said, staring out at Joe's truck parked 15 stories below me. "How careless of my bailiff to leave the truck where your client could easily take it back. I really must speak to him." "Very funny. My client's going to soon know he isn't. He's going to get in that truck and drive away, right now." I told my tow guy to fill up the tank, and he gave it an oil change too, gratis. "Tell your client to get in his truck and drive off, and that if I ever see that truck again, I'll seize it, to satisfy the rest of my client's judgment." Pro bono guy tried to argue, but I was firm. Then I put the phone down and picked up my coffee. A few minutes later Joe walked out of his lawyer's office and over to his truck. As he walked I saw that there was no longer a bounce to his step. The joy had gone out of him. Joe wasn't the first guy I ruined, and he won't be the last, but he is the only one whose final ruin I witnessed from on high, from my office, and it was one of the most powerful experiences of my life, watching a man walk to his truck, knowing that I had stripped him of everything else he had, and that he owed his possession of his last asset, his truck, to my mercy. Joe drove away, his big-ass ancient truck spilling clouds of smoke from the exhaust. I was pretty sure I'd never hear from him again, and I never did. Story: deliberately deplete my prepaid phone balance, you will pay for it 1,000 times over. I went to middle school in the early 2010s, right before smartphones really took off. I got my first phone right before starting 6th grade. It was a slide phone with a pay-as-you-go plan that cost 10 cents per minute for calls and per text message sent or received. Worse yet, sending or receiving photos cost 25 cents each. It was very expensive, and my parents only gave me $100 a year for this. If I exceeded the amount, I had to cover the rest with my limited birthday and Christmas money I had. Fortunately, most of my friends were good about helping me preserve the balance. They would call and I'd let the call drop but immediately call back on a landline so it wouldn't count as a call, and they'd email me or message me on Skype for most things. Everything was good until Derek joined the group in 7th grade. At first we thought he was funny, but we quickly got fed up with him as he was very unpleasant and exhibited many antisocial behaviors. He started drama within the friend group and also caused issues between us and other kids outside of the group. He was manipulative and always played the victim when others rightfully called him out on his shit, and he knew how to charm parents, so getting rid of him was easier said than done. He was the one friend who didn't respect my phone situation. He very frequently texted me dumb memes, even though I told him multiple times to just email or Skype them to me instead since picture text messages cost 25 cents each. Unfortunately, blocking phone numbers was a feature that was unavailable for this pay-as-you-go plan, so there was nothing I could do as he spammed my phone. One day he got mad at me for some reason and spammed my phone with memes. He must have sent me over 100 lolcats over text. He kept sending them until I lost service since my phone balance was depleted. I had lost the $40 remaining in my account as a result. I was extremely pissed and demanded that he pay me the $40 he had cost me, and he refused and said it wasn't his problem. I got home from school really upset and told my dad about the situation, expecting him to go and tear Derek's mother a new one and demand the money, but my dad said that it wasn't worth the battle. I even asked him about a small claims court, but he said that not all battles are worth fighting, and that the effort wasn't worth $40. He took me to the carrier's store and loaded $50 onto the phone. The carrier changed my phone number, and they managed to block Derek's number. They had initially said that blocking phone numbers wasn't possible with this plan, but my dad insisted and would not leave the store until they did it. I was extremely paranoid about my phone number being leaked and other kids spamming it to fuck with me. Fortunately, my parents got iPhones that summer and got me one too, and the new family plan had an unlimited text plan. Nonetheless, I was pissed at the $40 he essentially stole from me out of malice. Fortunately, not too long after, there was a big blowout between Derek and the rest of the friend group at the end of the school year and we permanently kicked him out of the group. He was an outcast the following year in 8th grade. Nobody was tolerating his shit anymore, and he changed schools the year after and we never heard from him again. Fast forward to a few years ago, I was back home for a few months between graduating college and starting a new job on the other side of the country. I went out to some garage sales one Saturday morning and I ended up at Derek's house. I recognized his mother, but I don't think she recognized me. I guess glasses and a beard is all you need. I noticed some Pokemon napkins out for sale, and when I picked them up to look at them, Derek's mom said that her son had been obsessed with Pokemon for his whole life and that she was tired of Pokemon stuff occupying her home for so many years. I said that these napkins were for my younger cousin who is really into Pokemon, and asked if she had any more Pokemon stuff. She said she didn't know people were still into that and that there were a few boxes in the attic with her son's old stuff. She actually took me inside the house, which I never imagined I'd set foot inside ever again, and let me climb up the attic ladder and take down several large boxes to look through. The first one had Christmas ornaments in it and other junk, but I freaked out inside when she opened a box jam-packed with Pokemon video games in the original boxes, though I kept my cool on the outside. The whole reason I had agreed to go inside in the first place was because I was holding out hope of this exact scenario happening. See, I knew Derek was obsessed with Pokemon. Our friend group liked Pokemon back in the day even when other kids thought it wasn't cool, but Derek was on a whole different level. He bragged about his Pokemon collection all the time. At the time he had every single main series game in the original box, and in mint condition as he always had to add in. I went to his house once and he was showing me his collection. He yelled at me for touching one of the games. Nobody was allowed to touch them except him. He had many older Nintendo games in excellent condition, but Pokemon was his favorite. He had had a couple of incidents with his mom damaging or throwing away his things. It wasn't out of malice, but just ignorance, as she didn't think the games or collectibles had any value. Fast forward into the present day, I was thinking about this when I asked his mother if she had any other Pokemon stuff. She ended up bringing out the motherlode. We opened all of the boxes she had me bring down. Within the boxes there was the beloved collection of Pokemon games, all very well preserved, as well as several Nintendo consoles, hundreds of games, 24 binders full of Pokemon cards, and there was also a box of many Lego sets with the original boxes and everything, with many old Star Wars sets. When I saw Django Fett I knew I struck gold. I told her that I liked old Legos as well, and asked her how much for the 5 boxes of games, cards, and Lego sets, and she thought for a second and said $100 a box, or $400 for all 5. I told her I would take it all and hauled ass to get to an ATM. I loaded the 5 boxes into my dad's truck and immediately drove home. I knew there was potentially tens of thousands of dollars of goods here. This was the score of a lifetime and I finally felt vindicated for the $40 Derek had taken from me all those years ago. I ended up giving all the stuff to my uncle, who's a hobbyist eBay reseller. He offered to sell it all. He was willing to go through the effort and sell everything individually, and despite my insistence he said he wouldn't take more than a 10% cut of the profits after all fees and taxes. We went through and logged every single item along with the estimated value, and the total of the whole lot was about $40,000. 40,000 was a poetic number since this was 1,000x the value of what Derek stole from me all those years ago. My uncle sold most of the lot before the end of the summer and ended up writing me a check. Though it was considerably less than $40,000, it was still a life-changing amount of money for me. I was able to pay off my remaining student loans and put the rest towards a down payment on a new car. Story: I ruined my ex-boyfriend's life 20+ years ago, and I just made sure it stayed ruined. When I was in college in the 90s, I met Jake, then M23, through mutual friends. He had already graduated and was planning to move to the opposite side of the United States for grad school, and I had already been making plans to move with friends only a 90-minute drive away from where he was moving to. We had so much in common, fell in love, and it really seemed like fate, both planning to move 3,000 miles and landing so close together. He had 2 sisters and a younger brother who were all awesome people, and I became instant friends with them as well. Because he was in school and I was working, I would usually go to him to hang out on weekends. He was renting a house with 2 roommates, also in his program. We were young so money was tight, but we had fun, went for taco dates and spent a lot of time at his house where he was breeding and selling small animals. Jake was an animal sciences PhD student, so being around animals was normal and I loved it. I met and became friends with his advisor's wife Mary, mid-50s, who worked in administration at the university. She is a lovely woman and I would often have lunch with her when I went over on weekends. Jake was a teaching assistant and I met other people in the program and made friends with them faster than he did. After about 2 years of dating, I was at the house one day, laying in bed together, in a state of some undress, and he said out of the blue, he was concerned I'd been gaining weight and it made it harder for him to be attracted to me. No concern about my health, it was all about him finding me unattractive. I sat up and said, well, then maybe you should make sure there is better food for me to eat than crackers and cheese when I come up on weekends. Even at 23, I didn't take that kind of Bachelor of Science. I had gained maybe 10 pounds since meeting him 2 years earlier and still wore the same size clothes, about a US size 6 to 8. I wasn't going to engage in a fight about it after all, it was his problem, not mine, so I asked him calmly, "So what is your solution to this?" He stared at me blankly and said, "Well, I guess that you should try to lose weight," and I said, "Nah, I'm not going to do that, so what are you going to do about it?" He said, "Well, I guess nothing, I wanted to let you know how I feel," and I said, "Cool, thank you," put my clothes back on, went to sleep and drove home the next day as usual. We keep dating, and about 3 months later he called me and said he wanted to break up after close to 3 years. The reason, and I quote, "You don't know enough about science." He felt like he couldn't have a conversation with me about his work where he didn't have to use common names for animals instead of scientific ones. I said, "Well, that's bullshit, what's the real reason?" He said it was the real reason. He came to see me a month later to return something of mine, and I confronted him, demanding the real reason. He finally admitted he had been seeing one of his undergrad students, let's call her Meg, a 19-year-old. He was then 26 and her teacher. I screamed at him to leave, my roommate threatened to throw him off our second-floor balcony if he didn't go, and he left. It hit me all at once after he walked out, and I went from rage to stunned laughter. I'd met Meg a few times, and at one point, she was at his house for a barbecue and spilled something all over her pants. Jake asked me if I could loan her some sweats. I couldn't because I was a size 8 and she was a size 18. Nothing wrong with that, at all, but the point is, I realized he made those comments about my weight to try and get me to break up with him because he was a coward. He clearly liked a big gal. Although, when he'd said those things to me about my weight, it was 1 a.m., I lived about 95 miles away and we had just had sex, so I don't know how he thought this would go. Even in hindsight, it perplexes me. Did he think I was going to break up with him and storm off into the night and drive for an hour and a half? Anyway, I emailed his roommates, it was the early 2000s, it's how you communicated anything you didn't want to say on the phone. I wanted to let them know we'd broken up and that they were always lovely to me and thank them for being friends. They both admitted they knew about Meg and were the ones to demand that Jake tell me or they would. That's when he broke up with me with the lame, "you don't understand science" excuse. One of his roommate, a super nice, super cute guy named George, offered to help me get a few things still at their house that he had collected for me away from around the house. He suggested I come up for the weekend, we go out and drink and have a good time, all the things Jake didn't want to waste money on, and I said sure. So I went up and George let me into the house while Jake was gone. I took photos of all of his animals because while I might not be a student, I paid attention and I knew he had an endangered species in his care. He wasn't breeding it, it was an unreleasable animal he had taken in from a rescue organization. There was paperwork he had to submit with a $25 fee, and he refused to do it, saying he didn't want the government in his business. I took photos of that animal, all his breeding conditions, and a photo of an animal not allowed in the state which was in a tank, right next to a window and visible from outside. I then went out for a night on the town with George. We stumbled in early, around midnight, so Jake and Meg, who were watching TV, would see me in a short dress, drunk, and George practically carrying me. I spent the night in George's room. He was a total gentleman but made sure to leave the room and parade past them in his boxers a few times, and we giggled and moaned loudly so they could hear us. When I went to leave the next morning, Jake said I didn't have to act like a whore in front of him as I ate a donut slowly in my rumpled dress with messy hair while George beamed at me and then planted a kiss on my head. Meg looked ashamed, not quite knowing where to look, and I said, "Have fun with my leftovers," and walked out. I wanted to think the petty, loud, hook up and a few juvenile insults was my revenge. It was not. The next day I had my photos developed, the good old days, and called the State Office of Fish and Wildlife. I reported the animals in the house, the potential overcrowding of breeding animals, and the 2 animals he shouldn't legally have it all in the state, and asked them how to make a report. Turns out Jake wasn't well liked by his peers in his program, or by his roommates, but I was. George had suggested that he and their other roommate could submit complaints to the university that a teaching assistant was sleeping with one of his students and showing her favoritism. The night we were out at the bars, we made sure to tell the story to anyone who they knew. They made sure all the women in his classes knew he was sleeping with Meg. It wasn't a large program, so people knew fast he had cheated and was now dating his student. George and the other roommate made sure people knew they had put in complaints, sick of Jake's entitled Bachelor of Science. With my full statement made and photos sent to the state wildlife officials, I called my friend Mary, Jake's advisor's wife. She knew about the breakup and lame reason, and I let her know he admitted he was sleeping with a student. I'd been emailing with him and he admitted to it in writing, so I sent that to Mary. To say she was not happy about that was an understatement. She said she made sure it would be investigated and told her husband, Jake's direct advisor, while I was on the phone with her. Speaking of investigations, a few weeks later George called me, giddy, to say state fish and wildlife officials were there, confiscating animals. He told them he would be happy to tell them whatever they needed to know. Meg was there when it happened and told the officials as far as she knew, all the animals belonged to her boyfriend Jake and that they were all legal. That put George and the other roommate in the clear. One animal was kept in the backyard, so it was implied to Jake that a neighbor reported it. While they were there to investigate, they knew to look in the back window to see the far more problematic, illegal to have in the state under nearly any circumstances, animal. Since George was on the lease, he was able to let them in to investigate in the house. The animals were all in communal areas and the officers stayed there for a few hours and returned with a warrant to take all the animals and enter Jake's room to investigate. George and the other roommate let them into their rooms with no issues and were quickly cleared. Meg apparently couldn't get a hold of Jake and eventually drove to the university to find him. Remember, no cell phones yet. It was a good day. The only animals they left was some guppies in a fish tank. Now, students need grant money to do research and a large part of animal studies funding comes from the federal government. Jake had just gotten an icosapentaenoic accident right around when he broke up with me. So I called the icosapentaenoic accident and asked how I would report that a person with a federal grant was being investigated for illegally harboring endangered animals. Long story short, he lost his icosapentaenoic accident grant and had to make restitution on what had already been used, close to $30,000. He would never be able to get another federal grant. He avoided jail time on the state charges since all the animals were in good health, but lost all his breeding animals worth thousands of dollars since they were collected for safekeeping during the investigation when the two illegal animals were taken. In the end, he owed a $15,000 fine and the two animals went to a nearby nature center. For years, I would stop by if I was in the area to visit them. The university revoked his with a student. He somehow escaped being expelled, but it always shocked me that he never tried to hide the relationship with Meg and was so stupidly self-assured he didn't even wait the 4 weeks until she would have been done with his class to start publicly dating her. By the university rules, he would have been in the clear to date her, not being her teacher anymore, and she would just have to avoid any classes he was a teaching assistant in. It never fails to make me laugh. After a few months, I emailed his sisters and told them I missed them because Jake broke up with me after trying to call me fat and cheating on me, and I felt weird contacting them. The girls told me he told the family I broke up with him because of the distance. I forwarded them emails that Jake wrote after the breakup, talking about how he fell for Meg and he was sorry about it, but it was true. I couldn't keep up with him academically and it made him attracted to Meg. Jake managed to convince his dad to pay for 1 more year of school so he could get a master's instead of a, and while I stayed in contact with his sisters and brother via email and then social media, I largely let it all go. I got even, made some friends, Mary became like an auntie to me, and I went on with life. I went on to get a master's degree myself, and my specialty: helping scientists and doctors communicate their work to lay people. You know, us dummies who can't remember all the scientific names. I swear, it happened by accident, not design, but I love it and I work with everyone from small-town doctors and nurses to pharmaceutical companies to museums to state and federal governments to film and TV producers. I travel a lot and speak and get to learn a lot of cool things about our planet and how things work. I knew through his siblings that Jake and Meg got married and had 2 kids. Meg dropped out of the sciences and became an accountant. Jake went back to breeding animals. Every once in a while, his sisters or brother would tell me something over for lunch or via text, but we had our own relationship that exists outside of him. Apparently, when I sent a wedding gift for one of his sisters, he loudly complained at a co-ed bridal shower that all of his siblings still were my friend and didn't make an effort to embrace his now wife, Meg. Apparently, the sister just laughed and said, "I don't make it a habit to be friends with homewreckers." This is how Jake's parents found out how their relationship started and ours ended, 10 years after we broke up. Jake never found out I was behind reporting him to the state, and in the end, I didn't lie about a single thing, except maybe exaggerating a drunken make-out session with George, who is now a successful and tenured professor with a lovely wife and daughters. Fast forward about 20 years to a few weeks ago. I was at a university giving a lecture to a room of 250 undergrad and grad students. In the end, I was mingling with the student afterwards and I hear a voice say, "Hey, long time no see," and I realize it's Jake, and I didn't change the expression on my face at all. I was completely shocked and my instinct was to play dumb. So I said, "I'm sorry, help me out, have we met at another workshop or lecture?" He looked incredulous and said, "It's me, Jake," and I said, "I can't place you, but I would love to figure it out." Finally, I gasped and said, "Oh my goodness, Jake. I guess I blocked you out," and said, "Well, lovely to see you," and moved on quickly when he tried to reach out and hug me. I was happy to leave it there, with the satisfaction of him seeing me as a guest lecturer in a science department of a major university when he was just in the audience. The department chair and faculty who had invited me to speak took me out to dinner, and while there, one of them said, "So you know Jake?" I said, "I did, from over 20 years ago," being vague about how. She went on to tell me he had been there for an interview for a teaching position and had spent a few days there observing, and they were likely going to hire him. I couldn't control it, I scoffed. When they all looked at me, I said, "I'm sorry, I'm just shocked he's teaching after what happened at University X." They said what happened and I said, he was sleeping with a 19-year-old student when he was 26 and he had to leave the program without a because he couldn't afford to stay after losing his scholarship. The three people I was with all looked at each other like they knew they had a problem and said, "Wow, we'll have to look into that," and changed the subject. My old friend Mary, retired a year or two now, but still friendly with her old collages, called me this weekend to say a friend at the university let her know someone had called doing a background check about Jake and they pulled his file, which included being fired, leaving the program with a lower degree, and the complaint letters from over 20 years ago about his conduct. Mary's name had been on it with her husband listed as the "so she thought she'd like to know." As a bonus, it had a copy of his arrest record for the illegal animals. I guess his dad had paid for a decent lawyer to get the record expunged after the charges were reduced, and he paid the fine so it doesn't show up on a standard background check. I don't think he's going to get that job. So I will return to my life, content that the universe comes through sometimes, especially if you give it a little nudge now and then. The best revenge is when you don't have to do anything wrong, you just have to help direct knowledge to the right places. If there is anything I can impart to any young women and men reading this, as I shimmy happily into my now size 10 pants, it's that, if someone who is supposed to love you complains about your weight or looks, that is their problem to fix mentally, not yours, and maybe it's time to check out what they are doing behind your back or simply move on. Remember though, it is their flaw, not yours. If Jake hadn't been a coward and tried to make me break up with him and just ended things with me in a mature way, I might not have found out about Meg and turned his own wickedness back on himself. Story, stick me with hidden charges, I'll show you. So this past Christmas, my missus and I purchased one of our 9-year-old son's Santa gifts from a certain UK sports retail company that also have many stores here in Ireland as well. It was a football rebounder, kinda like a trampoline that you kick the ball at and it bounces back to you. Anyway, we purchased it from their Irish website and thought nothing more of it. A few days go by and we get a notification from a certain brown uniformed courier company that there are customs charges due on something. And as you can imagine, we bought many things for the kids, so we had to double check what we've ordered, and we didn't have anything left that was being imported, so we naturally assumed it was a scam. So I told the wife to call the company and find out who shipped it, and it was a different courier company based in the UK. After a bit of digging and investigating, it turns out that it's our rebounder. They had shipped it from the UK, via a local carrier, to the brown uniformed guys to deliver to us. Now, my wife and I are both on disability, so an additional charge of almost €50 when you're both already on a fixed income is harsh, especially at Christmas, so I told her to pay it and I'd deal with the retailer. The first day I called, I had to call 3 times, being stuck on hold for at least 20 minutes each time, but I was patient and polite because I've worked in a call center before, so I knew those people are only doing their job. But I asked to speak to a manager and was promised a call back each time. That never happened. The second day was quite similar. The third day I was starting to get annoyed, so called back, waiting even longer on hold, and finally wasn't taking this shit any longer. I told the rep that all I wanted was the €50 back because our consumer rights in Ireland dictate that a person must be informed of any additional charges on a purchase, at the very latest, by the final checkout screen, and in this case there was nothing to show that, and I could easily replicate that issue by putting the same item in my basket and going all the way to the checkout screen again, and there was nothing saying we'd have to pay import charges. The rep was indifferent to the situation but tried to help, and what he said sent me over the edge. He offered me a measly €20 gift voucher to use on their website, but more importantly, he read a statement to me. He said, "We advise our customers that there may be charges, delivery duty, unpaid customs charges on any item that gets shipped outside of the UK." Then I asked him where it states this information, and he paused, then said he didn't actually know. I said, "Well, I know one thing. It doesn't say it anywhere on this transaction because I've checked, and because this is a violation of my consumer rights, I'm going to give your company one last chance to make this right. Have your manager call me within the next 60 minutes, or I'm going to post this entire debacle on LinkedIn and link every senior officer in your company." Then I hung up the phone and waited. Yet again, no call. The next day I went on LinkedIn and followed through on my promise. I created a post detailing what they had done by sticking us with hidden charges, and that they were ignoring our requests for a manager, and everything they said and did. Then I tagged every senior officer at that company, from the regional managers, through the European directors, all the way to the CEO, and I shamed them for how they operate their company. This, ladies and gentlemen, was now an act of war. Shortly after I posted that, I noticed that they took down the item from their website in an attempt to hide this, but they must have thought in a simpleton that doesn't understand how the internet works. They didn't realize that when you searched for rebounder on their site, that it shows the item in question, so I took a screenshot of that, then another of the item page that was now missing, but then I did a Google cached search for the same page and found a version from 2 days prior happily showing the item. Then I added a comment to my original post highlighting how they were trying to hide it, with the evidence, and trolling them for their heinous behavior, especially at Christmas. Then I tagged and shamed all the senior officers again, and at this point it was really starting to get some attention, not only publicly, but 3 people in incognito mode viewed my profile. I wonder who they could have been. So naturally, I took a screenshot of the 3 mysterious visitors listed on my profile and did the same thing. Commented on my own post highlighting it and trolling them for their incompetence. The next morning I got a call from a senior exec at their head office in the UK, practically licking my boots with apologies, asking what she can do to make this right. I told her I originally only wanted my €50 back as it wasn't fair, nor even legal, that I had to pay it. But since I had to go to such lengths to get their tie-in, now I wanted my €50 back, a full refund on my entire purchase, and I wanted to keep the product. That was the only thing that would make this go away. She asked for a couple of hours to fix it, and I said okay. About an hour later I got another call from her again apologizing. She asked for my PayPal address where she sent the €50, then she refunded the whole purchase, and she let us keep the product. Obviously, I thanked her for her help because at that stage I was just happy it was over, but I'll be fucked if I'll let anyone walk all over my family, even if they are a £58 million annual company. The most of the story here is, don't take bullshit from anyone. I may be just one man, but my son's view of Santa is far more valuable to me than the opinion of some retail chain that doesn't care about its customers nor how it operates ethically. Story, not going to pay overtime. Think again. I was discussing this sub with a good friend, and he said, "Boy, have I got a story that'll fit." It wasn't his story, but his brother's, and I sat with him and got the details. Buckle up, it's a good one and a long one. Let's call him Bob. Bob has been fiddling with computers since he was a kid, and knows them pretty well. As with most IT people, he's moved from job to job. The employer he worked for was a service distribution company, and there were 2 IT employees. The company was located in Ontario, Canada. About 3 years ago, Bob's employer decided to modernize their software. They had separate programs for dispatching, for inventory, for payroll and finances, and it was complicated moving information from one program to the other. They decided to get an ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning program, and Bob recommended one that he knew inside out from a previous employer. For those of you who don't know, an ERP program handles everything: purchase orders, sales, inventory, personnel, vendors, customers. All of it. You can run a report and find out which customer has bought the most part ABC in the last year, which salesman has improved his numbers the most, which vendor has the fastest delivery time, which shipper packed the most orders. Everyone in the company used the ERP program, but it was very complicated, and they used the aspects of it that related to their position. For example, the receiver would accept a shipment, verify the quantity, confirm it was received, and the inventory stats would be available to the salespeople if they wanted to look up how many were on hand. The receiver didn't care what the price was, or who the vendor was, he just did his job. Bob was run ragged during the implementation process, but he managed to train most of the employees on their aspects, and after a few months, everything was running fairly smoothly. Bob still got tickets for tweaks in the operation of the software, and occasional hardware IT issues. Then the company decided to expand their footprint and was marketing into different time zones. That messed things up. Atlantic Canada is 90 minutes early, so if someone sent an email or an order at 8 a.m. their time, it would arrive at 6:30 a.m. Ontario time. Pacific Canada is 3 hours late, so an email sent at 3 p.m. Vancouver time would arrive at 6 p.m. This stretched out the day, so many staff came in early and worked late. Bob would arrive at 8 a.m. and there would be people that demanded his immediate assistance, and were annoyed that he didn't respond instantly, even though their request was submitted before his start time. Same with late in the day, his phone would ring at dinner time with people that wanted help right now. They decided to stagger his and his IT colleagues' shift times. Bob would start at 6 a.m. and work till 2:30, and his colleague would start at 10:30 a.m. and work till 7 p.m. Bob's colleague had kids, and refused the shift change. The employer insisted. The colleague quit. That meant that Bob was the only person in the IT department. The employer said they would look to hire a new IT guy, but they had trouble finding one that knew the ERP system, and they were offering well under a market value salary. Bob asked for a raise and was denied. Then he wanted overtime, and the employer told him that as an IT specialist, he was exempt from overtime laws in Ontario. Bob looked it up, and the employer was correct. This went on for some time, and he knew lots of IT people socially. They told him what the company was offering, and Bob knew that they wouldn't find another tech. Things went downhill from there. Bob would get chewed out if he missed a call or an email, no matter what time it came in. He had to train new hires in the ERP system, as well as take care of the hardware. He asked repeatedly for better compensation, and was denied, so he planned to get a new job. Now here's the revenge. Bob had access to the entirety of the ERP program. When a user signed in, the time was logged, and even if they didn't sign out, after 15 minutes it would log them out anyway. Everyone in the company was on salary, and many of them came in early and stayed late. Ontario labor law states that even salaried workers are entitled to overtime after 44 hours a week, unless they were managers or supervisors. So Bob jumped into the program and ran a report for each employee that wasn't a manager. All the way back to when the ERP program was started. Then he reached out to an employment lawyer and got the okay to refer employees to him. Bob lined up another job, and after he left, every employee in the company got an email with an Excel sheet showing the hours they had put in past 44 hours a week. The subject line said you're legally entitled to overtime pay. In the body of the email was the lawyer's name. The shit hit the fan. Almost every employee authorized the lawyer to negotiate with the company on their behalf, and the company had to pay a ton of money. All the company had to do was pay Bob for the extra work he put in. Instead, they had to pay almost everyone. Story: got rude guy arrested for suspended license. This story takes place about 20 years ago. In the mid-2000s, my friends and I would frequent a small billiards place in a neighboring town where you could rent a table by the hour or play per game. We'd play a few games, watch whatever sports were on TV, and have casual conversations. There were no problems and no drama until about 3 months of us visiting this place. A guy shows and takes our spot at the billiards table. No big deal. We were all chatting anyway. 20 minutes later, my friend lets him know we want to play next game, and the jerk is super dismissive. Needless to say, we didn't get in during the next game. So I politely let him know we wanted to play next. Another lady chimed in she wanted the game after us. The guy blatantly ignored me and the other woman. Some more time going by and the guy leave the table. We see our chance to get in. We put the quarters in and the balls are dispensed except the green 6 ball. The guy took it to the bathroom with him. At this point it was ridiculous and we notified the manager. The manager noted it was 12:30 and they were going to be calling last call and closing, so he didn't want to make a scene by kicking him out. He gets us another ball so we can play. The guy comes out of the bathroom and knows we realized what he did. He smirks and proceeds to the patio to have a cigarette, bringing along his beer and the green billiard ball. The guy comes back in and tossed the ball he was holding onto the table, hitting a few balls on the table and messing up our game. He goes up to the bar just in time for last call. One of the friends I was with suggested we follow him home and each call the highway patrol to report a suspected drunk driver. 3 of 4 of us agree. So when he leaves, we used our trusty Nextel push-to-talk phones and coordinated several calls to the police. We provided details like license plate, vehicle, make and model and color, and mentioned the car nearly hit another vehicle, was swerving between lines and driving erratically. This was under a 15-minute plan. We had no idea where the guy lived, but suspected it was close as he was visiting a neighborhood place, so our time was limited. The one guy who didn't notify the police tailed the jerk and called the skiddy when a police officer pulled between him and the guy and turned in his lights to pull him over. The police blotter that week included an arrested of a guy who was pulled over after multiple calls of erratic driving. He wasn't arrested for DWI, but instead for driving on a suspended license. Story: my landlord got not exactly what he deserved, but it sure was a rough ride for him. I had a landlord who was pretty absent. I lived in this building, a high-rise, like 20 stories, for 10 years. He, despite living next door to me, was absent and cold personally, but cool enough. Rent was good. Our agreement was never bother him about anything unless it's an absolute emergency. Shower head wonky, go buy a new one. Fridge breaks, get it fixed, or dude, just buy a new one. Take it out of what you pay in rent. Lost the receipt, I don't care, I know more or less what a fridge costs, just take it out of rent. Finally his wife decides she wants more rent, wants to rent the place out as an office, not legal, and wants us out ASAP. I agree to move out a month early and get a month's rent back and deposit. Complete 180 on their part. The place is ruined, can't give you shit until you fix all this stuff. 2 main things. My cats did scratch up the leather legs of the dining table, and the pull-up bar made 2 dents in the doorframe of the kitchen, which was quite nice hardwood. They come to me with this list of tons of stuff like, oh, you hang a photo frame here, this tile is slightly chipped. This is the busiest work time of the year for me, but I'm trying to be cooperative. Sure, I got the table legs re-leathered, spackle the photo frame wall hole. Can't do anything about the door frame, take it out of deposit. Patch the tile. Like dozens of little everyday wear and tear things, like you want me to change the window screens, these are all new screens and in nicer shape than when I moved in. But I did them all, I trusted the guy. Gotta get my money at the end, he should have been giving me 24k RMB, 2,500 pounds. He gave me 5. I still need to use the money to fix all that stuff. If you can't accept the 5, I can't give you anything at all. I was super pissed off, but took the 5. Now, people in the building are gossipy. I don't participate, but I did tell this one older lady about my frustration. She told everyone. The wife went from being the star of the mommies group of the building to nobody wanting to talk to her. People shunned the guy, too. I originally told them I was planning on moving to another city, but an opportunity came up and I ended up renting a similar unit in the same building. So they thought they could just screw me over and not have to see me, but now they still did. Often. A year later the office calls me with some question about how to do something with the floor heating. I go, door frame is not fixed, still has dents. I call the guy like, what the hell, man, and he tells me to mind my own business. 5 years later, I see the light at my old place is still on at 3 a.m. Huh, that's odd. I go to check, the door is open, and the place is just trashed, ruined. Cabinets broken, stuff on the walls, lazy landlord, and the dents on the kitchen doorframe are still there. So the guy never fixed anything, just kept my money. By this time smartphones were popular and we had a chat group for the whole building, so about 500 people. I took pictures and posted everything. Apparently he had also nicked these people's deposit, and there was a huge ruckus when they trashed the place, cops called. All these people chime in with complaints and pictures. People smoking in the hallways, leaving leaky rubbish outside the front door, videos of people using foul language in front of children, dirty footprints. He got fined a lot for 1. Creating a public disturbance, 2. Degrading the quality of the living space, 3. Illegally renting a residence as an office, and to top it off the building management wouldn't grant him permission to have workers in to fix the place, so it sat there empty for like 6 months. The fines were big, too. Take 1.5 months rent from me, lose a year's rent. Suck it, bro. Story, 401k with a side of revenge. Someone suggested I post this story over here, enjoy. When our first child was born, my ex forced me to quit my job. When our second child was 2, I found out about his affair. By then he was extremely verbally, emotionally, and sometimes physically abusive. When he abused our firstborn, I put him out. That was in 2012. I couldn't afford daycare to work and had no family support. He refused to give me any money to take care of the kids, saying, "The courts haven't ordered me to give you a dime." He lied to the bank and had my accounts frozen and even assaulted me when I filed for default in the divorce. The judge finally ordered him to pay child and spousal support 6 months after I kicked him out. It was $2,562 a month. He refused to pay it until the garnishment kicked in, and by then he was $6,000 behind in support. I used that to get permission to move away. I remarried a year after the divorce. I checked the court docs and there was a little box that said spousal support stopped upon remarriage if that box was checked. It wasn't checked, so I figured I was good. Instead of filing for his retirement, I just took that year of spousal support, $12,000, and left it alone. Spousal support was only ordered for 2 years. In 2017, he filed for sole custody of the kids out of nowhere. That was when he found out I had remarried and he had paid spousal support to me during the first year of my marriage. I told him I took that money instead of filing for my share of his retirement. I said if he let me keep that $12,000, I wouldn't file to split his 401k. He demanded that I repay the spousal support. The judge ordered me to repay it but increased child support and deducted the repayment from that. It ended up that I got an extra $20,000 a month and he repaid himself. He dropped his bid for custody in exchange for 2 extra weeks in summer. I pursued the retirement account split. He refused to cooperate and dragged it out for 4 years. It was so bad, they sanctioned him and he had to pay me $600 a month for a year in addition to child support. They also charged him with contempt. In January 2021, he proposed to his girlfriend. In May of 2021, I finally got the disbursement from his 401k. I won't say how much it was, but it was about 4 times the amount of spousal support overpayment. I had no idea it would be that much. I had thought it would be around 12k, which is why I thought keeping that year of spousal and not filing for his retirement account was a fair trade. Had he not tried to take the kids from me, I never would have filed to split the account. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. His fiancée emailed me recently and told me it is my fault he won't marry her because I cleaned out his retirement account. She said I shouldn't have stolen his money. I told her that I gave him the option to let me keep that year of spousal support or take it back and I could file for his retirement. He chose to have me file for his retirement. I told her that if he really wanted to marry her and protect his assets, they could get a prenup so he wouldn't have to worry about it. She said she shouldn't have to sign a prenup because I robbed him. I never asked to be financially dependent on him. He clearly indicated he wanted a court order to take care of his kids, so I got him one. I tried to be fair and take the lesser amount by taking the spousal support and not filing for his retirement. He wouldn't let me. In summary, my ex refused to pay me until support orders dropped, refused to pay until they revoked his license. Tried to get me in trouble for accepting spousal support overpayment, and in the end it cost him a lot of money out of his 401k. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.